All right. Good afternoon and welcome to this week's Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar. Matt Helmers with Iowa State University and ISU Extension and Outreach, and uh, fortunate to get to moderate a lot of these webinars and super excited for this one. We have Mark Renz with us. Mark is a professor and extension weed specialist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's going to talk to us today about management options for invasive plants in natural and managed landscapes. So certainly as we think about our agricultural landscapes or even some of our conservation areas that maybe we want a little more natural, managing invasive plants is really critical for those areas. So I think this is a really important topic and timely as we think about management of those areas over the next few years. So with that, if you have questions, please type those in the chat box as we go, and I will get those to Mark at the end of his talk. Also, I think be prepared. He's going to ask a question or two to maybe type in on what you want to hear about. So be ready to type that in there as well. With that, Mark, the virtual floor is all yours.
Great, thanks, Matt. And just want to confirm you can hear me.
I can hear you coming through loud and clear.
Great, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here today to talk about this topic. This topic is challenging to discuss in a 25-minute period. We actually just finished doing a 4-hour workshop that goes into lots of details about this. So I'm going to try and do my best to cover a general overview of a few things. And if there's any questions later on, feel free to email me and we can hopefully answer a lot of those in the Q&A. You'll see my emails at the bottom of the screen here. So, I've been doing this for 19 years in Wisconsin and over 25 years professionally dealing with invasive plants in both managed and unmanaged landscapes. Since I'm an extension specialist, my goal is to develop, test, and improve management options for invasive plants. So our lab does a lot of this work. But also, we try to get this information and what we've learned out into hands of people like you. And so we do educational events like this, but much of our information lands on our website. So I want to highlight this right here, Renz Weed Science. And there's a plethora of information that you can access from this website that deals with identification, management, updated research trials, etc. So please visit this website and I'll be pointing out some of those tools as we move throughout this presentation. I work on a range of invasive species. We've studied over 75 invasive plants and how to manage them in a range of habitats. So I'm not going to talk a lot about the specifics, so I'm going to be a little bit general, but please have your specific questions ready. Today, really what I want to focus about is, why do we even care about these invasive plants? What's the deal and how are they impacting us, the landscape? We're going to talk about some general management approaches we can take and the pluses and minuses, and this is where I'll really ask for input from you on which techniques you want me to spend more time on versus less. We'll highlight some of the resources available, but really I want to make sure and save lots of time for questions so I can answer your guys' questions. Okay, so starting off, what is an invasive species? Really, there's a lot of confusion over this. There's really 4 main top points. The number one most important point is that invasive species is not native to that area historically. Why is that important? That's important because we believe that these invasive plants are using different attributes and traits and causing different impacts to the environment than many of our native plants. So a great example is, while box elder is native to our area, no one likes it. We can't call it an invasive plant because it is native. And its impacts, a lot of the other species are adapted to and usually can survive and persist, where with invasive plants they can't. So that's point number one. It's not native. It can produce and reproduce without any help from us. And it tends to dominate those areas. As you can see here in the lower right-hand corner, this is a picture of Japanese barberry invading native hardwood forest. But the biggest issue that a lot of people don't think about that defines an invasive species, its presence is or is likely to cause some type of harm. That harm can be economically. In Iowa, Palmer amaranth is running rampant, and that's causing lots of farmers economic harm. We can have a lot of these invasive woodies that can harm our forests and our forestry production systems. Lots of that harm can be environmental, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about the environmental harm. And sometimes the harm can be to us as humans, so it can increase our risk to human health harm, and we'll talk about that. So I'm going to just use woody plants as a focus for much of this, but a lot of these topics can be broad and broadened to many of our herbaceous process. And we look at impacts of woody plants or any invasive species. We see here a thicket of common buckthorn in one of our hardwood forests. I don't think any of you would disagree if I said this buckthorn is impacting the vegetation that's growing underneath it, because it's essentially not there, right? But what people don't often realize is there's lots of other impacts that these invasive plants are causing in our environment. Those impacts can be to wildlife, to our environment, and even to us. So I'm just going to overview some of these impacts and again, emphasize some of these woody invasive plants. Although these impacts are species specific, we don't think about these, and these are more reasons to control these plants. So many of our invasive woody plants can impact water runoff. We get increased runoff when they're invaded. They can impact channelization of our streams and many other things. But probably the biggest impact in the Midwest is these invasive plants like our bush honeysuckles and our buckthorn change the soil nutrient dynamics. And that can be pretty dramatic. It can increase the amount of nitrogen in these forested areas. And you may think, oh, adding nitrogen is good. Well, it's actually bad because it increases litter decomposition rates. And our hardwood forests need that litter layer to regenerate those plants. So adding that nitrogen into the soil by the higher N content in the leaves can cause all sorts of differences and changes to the soil chemistry and nutrient dynamics, and change a whole bunch of different processes. And the big problem with that is we can control and remove the buckthorn, but those nutrient dynamics have already been changed, so it takes extra time for those to return to natural levels. A lot of people may be thinking, yeah, but bush honeysuckle and common buckthorn are really good, and they produce these fruits, and these birds eat these fruits. Well, while there are fruits and the birds do eat them, the energy content is very low in those fruits, and so we don't get a benefit to a lot of our native upland birds. We actually also see that having those invasive woody plants in our forests increases predation of many of our native wildlife, particularly our annual grassland birds. And so they actually are a huge detriment to wildlife. You may be thinking, oh yeah, but the deer love it. Well, there's recent study that deer do not love these invasive sites. In all seasons except winter, white-tailed deer use these invaded sites much, much less. So some massive impacts to wildlife. And if you're growing woodland trees in this example for our forests, having those invasive shrubs presence has been shown to delay forest regeneration by decades, easily 15, 30 years or more, depending on the level. That's why many of our foresters want to manage these invasive shrubs, but managing these can be really expensive, thousands of dollars per acre, just to get initial treatment in dense infestations. And we can talk about that if you have questions later on. The scary part is many of these invasive species also impact us as our human health. There's been associations of many of our woody plants with ticks. To make the long story short, is these infested woody forests house and benefit rodents, which many more rodents survive, and the ticks survive on the rodents and lead to higher populations of either Lyme disease or with the Lone Star tick alpha gall syndrome. So a very good reason to control some of these woody invasives in our forests. If you're dealing with wild parsnip, you may know that the sap gets on your skin and can burn your skin, so some serious impacts to our health. So this was just a real short introduction to remind you that invasive plants impact our landscape in many, many ways just besides vegetation, but that's the one that we usually see. So think about that when trying to make a management decision on how much to control or if you should control it. So how do you control it? The good news is we have a plethora of tools that are available in our toolbox. I will emphasize we can't just pick one tool and expect it to work on all species. Management is specific to the species we have, so we need to really do our homework to figure out what the species is. And while we have lots of tools, what tools we pick is really going to be dependent on the site we manage. So I always like to emphasize to people, we need to think critically about what are the goals of the site that's invaded, what good plants and bad plants are there, some site-specific conditions, how much do you have? In this picture, this is an invasive mustard called hill mustard in southwestern Wisconsin. An area like this, we just have a few plants. It's really easy, and we'd select very different control techniques versus the upper right hand where it's just a sea of it. We'd have to go with different techniques. So we really need to think about the site and some of the site-specific information in order to develop a plan. And that's really the key. If you can remember one thing is when we're dealing with invasive plants, we need to develop a plan. And we really need to put on our anal retentive hat and go through this step and identifying plants, figuring out where they are and how much we have them, researching what effective control techniques are, go out there and do that, and then adapt our management. And I don't have time to talk about all these steps, but they're really, really important. I'm going to really focus on the control and just trying to overview some of the control techniques that we utilize for invasive plants. And really, there's just 3 general approaches that we use to control these. And again, I'm going to focus on woody invasive plants, but this holds true for herbaceous, annuals, perennials, etc. We have techniques that remove the whole plant from the system. We also have techniques that remove just the above ground plant. That works really well for annuals, but with perennials, we typically get them to resprout and recover over time. And then we have a range of herbicide techniques that work as well, and we'll talk about those going through this presentation. So I'm just going to highlight kind of the general positive and negative aspects of these different techniques. What you're going to see repeatedly me say is integrating multiple techniques, we usually get the best control over one technique alone. So manual removal works great. We can even manually remove some of these small shrubs. We can really be selective and use a leverage tool, like this is a weed wrench you can see here. And as long as we pull that crown off of that honeysuckle or buckthorn, it really works well on annuals and simple perennials that have a root crown. What it doesn't work on is creeping perennials like black locust or a tree of heaven, because we're just breaking off the roots and we're going to get resprouting. When we have dense infestations, we do not recommend these, and we do get a lot of disturbance when we do this. So a lot of times other invasives come in there. So this is a relatively effective tool in certain specific situations with low densities. Mowing can be really effective, and I think this is usually the cornerstone of much of our management. Again, like removal, this is really good on annuals and simple perennials that have a root crown or don't spread by creeping roots. If we time that mowing correctly, we can eliminate seed production, which these plants require in order to spread. And if we repeat this over multiple years, in some cases, like wild parsnip, we can eliminate populations. But we need to make sure that there's no seed coming in from other sources. And I'm sure we'll talk about that probably in the Q&A. The downside is if you're mowing, let's say you have a native prairie and you're trying to manage that and you're mowing every year in the middle of summer to prevent seed production, you're also harming those other plants and they may not have tolerance, and you need to do that for many years. There's a range of other biological control methods. I'm not going to talk about introducing foreign agents, but we can talk about that in the Q&A. I do want to talk about grazing because we have done quite a bit of grazing with either cattle, and just recently we finished a large project with goats, and they can be really effective and work really well. I think the challenges with grazing for control is trying to get picking the right animal that will feed on your invasive plant of choice can be a challenge, and the funding for it can be a challenge as well. We can get some suppression, but like mowing, it needs to be repeated over multiple years. If we have some desirable vegetation and we can get someone to put their cattle in there and we can manage it the right way so that they also eat the weeds, or they at least don't let them flower, that can be a big benefit. Goats have been a huge, lots of interest on them, and they can be very effective. But if you don't have your own goat herd, our experience with, at least with woody invasives, is it can be quite expensive, and we need many years of grazing to get eradication of these and suppression. So again, probably might be a better tool that we can use to integrate with other tools versus standalone, at least with woody invasive and hard to control invasives. And we can talk more about that in the Q&A. Fire is another option, particularly in our prairies, can work really well, and many of our native species are well adapted. I don't think I need to go into the details. The negative about fire, besides having to repeat it over multiple years, is we have lots of risks to us in applying the fire, and to our community, smoke, and not all sites it's a good fit too. And then we have herbicides, and herbicides we spend a lot of time in our lab working on herbicides because they can be really effective. We can make a targeted application and kill a species with one application. That's a really great benefit. Some of the herbicides are even selective. So you can see in the lower screen, we killed the wild parsnip along the bank of that river. But in the background, we didn't spray, and the grass is still there. So we can selectively save some species and not have to reseed. It tends to be inexpensive when we have really heavily infested areas, but we can run into a lot of problems with this. If we misapply, we can do non-target damage. If we apply it in the wrong way, we can get herbicides going off target and causing lots of problems. So we really need to be cautious about how we use these and follow the instructions correctly. So I always like to tell people, if you're going to use a herbicide, you should ask some serious questions before picking up and spraying. Is this herbicide that I'm using selective or not? Does it kill everything I spray or not? Here's a great example of multiflora rose that we sprayed. We killed that multiflora rose, but we killed all that grass. And there were other herbicides we could have used that wouldn't have killed that grass. What do you think is going to grow back the next year? It's nothing but weeds because we killed that grass. You need to think about how to apply it the right way and follow those directions. We need to be really make sure that we apply it at the right rate and at the right timing, that recommendation, because if you screw that up, there's a good chance you could get less than ideal control. You also need to look at the restrictions that are present with that herbicide when you apply it. And one of the key things that I like to say is think about how long after I apply it does that herbicide persist in the environment, particularly in these wooded areas, because we can get residual herbicides that persist, be taken up in the soil and kill other plants that we don't want, like say an oak tree as well. So I would argue that any good recommendation that you're getting should answer, these questions. And if you don't answer those, please seek out more of that information. So I like to use this. This is a demonstration we put out in northern Wisconsin, where the previous year we put out a cut surface application, very targeted just to the surface. We applied 2 different herbicides. The picture on the left is Remedy, or a triclopyr-based product. The picture on the right is Arsenal, or an imazapyr product. Arsenal persists in the soil for a very long time, years, and is non-selective. Remedies or triclopyr products are relatively selective and don't last in the soil for very long. So you can see on the left, we did a good job killing all the target species, which were where those blue flags are. And we can see lots of vegetation recovering, and we can see some of the desirable trees are still surviving and doing well in that plot. Well, what do we see over in the right? We see lots of dead plants and stumps. Some of the small plants, some of the small saplings that we see here took up some of that herbicide and were injured or killed, as you can see as well. And a lot of the herbaceous understory isn't regrowing because arsenal has a long soil residual and is causing some of that non-target injury. In some cases, this may be what we want, but in many it isn't. So we really need to be careful about that. So when applying a herbicide, there's lots of different methods to apply them. And so this is where I want you to give me some advice, because I see I have 5 minutes left. I can describe probably a couple of these different methods. And so please enter in the chat which method you'd like me to go into some detail to describe. Foliar application, cut surface, basal bark, or stem injection, or it's commonly known as a hack and squirt. And then Matt can kind of chime in which was the winner. All of these have a place. There's pluses and minuses of all of these. And so it's really trying to figure out how to use these the best. We use a lot of foliar treatments, but cut surface and basal bark have been really cornerstones, particularly for woody invasive species management. And the beauty of those is you can do those any time of the year. So Matt, has there been any consensus on what they want me to talk about?
We've had a little on the basal and stem injection.
Okay,
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
So foliar applications, the key point I want to make is you're applying a very dilute solution, depending on the herbicide, 1 to 3%. You're applying it to the point of runoff, not when it starts running off the leaves. That's when you're losing your effectiveness because you need leaf absorption, and you're applying it when the plant's actively growing. Cut surface is when you're cutting the plant and you're applying a concentrated solution, anywhere from 5 to 25, in some cases 50% of that herbicide to the actively growing portion of that cut surface. And that can be done year round. So that's sounds like a lot of you have experience with that. The basal bark is one that some people don't think of. This is very similar to the cut surface, that you're applying a concentrated solution. So not just 1 to 3, but 15 to 25%. And you're applying it in at least a 12-inch band around the entire base of that plant. And so obviously this is for woody species. It works really well, and we really recommend this in plants that it's okay and you don't need to have them removed later on. I think one of the keys to basal bark, it works best when plants are relatively small, like 6-inch basal diameter or less. But with some plants, you can get control in those larger basal diameter species. The key is you have to mix that herbicide with an oil. I'd recommend using a bark oil, but you can use diesel fuel or kerosene if you don't have access. That's important because that herbicide needs to be absorbed through the stem and to get into the plant. And so the other key point of this is you need to make these applications when the bark is dry, because if there's water in between, it won't be absorbed. So this is a really good technique that you can use in your forest if you don't want to cut something down, which takes a lot of time, and then you got to swamp all those things. And so that's a neat technique that we have good success with. The other technique is a stem injection or hack and squirt. And this is one that's really common in the South, not used quite as much up in our neck of the woods, but is really effective. Essentially, all we're doing is taking a hatchet, cutting a small notch, just like less than an inch, into the bark to get to the cambium. And we're making several of those hacks around the plant, the tree. Every 2 to 3 inches, we want to make a hatch, and then we just squirt in with either a syringe, or you can get a approved pesticide squirt can, and just do like one squirt, which is usually 1 to 2 mils, and you put that in there. And if you create your little hack correctly, it just stays in that little area. It gets absorbed and it kills the plant. This is really effective. You're applying really concentrated solutions, like 50 to 100%. So it can be expensive if you're doing a lot. But if you're hiking back into the back 40 and you don't want to lug a bunch of water, this is a great, or a chainsaw, this is a great option for control, and really works well. We'd recommend doing it on trees or shrubs that are larger than 3 inches in diameter. Because if it's less and you get a hatchet, you're probably going to cut through the whole thing. So that's a really effective approach. So I know that was a whirlwind, but I'm right at 25 minutes. So I'll just kind of finish up saying this was really a primer. And if you have more questions, please visit my website for some of the detailed information. I wanted to just kind of give you an introduction that these invasive plants are impacting our landscapes in many more ways than we realize. We can visually see the vegetation impacts, but there's many, many more that are out there. The impacts are, and how we control these species are very species specific. So we really urge you to not get general control information, but really drill down and see, how do I control wild parsnip? How do I control crown vetch? How do I control buckthorn? And we really recommend consulting some expert advice and developing a plan. And we spend a lot of time creating expert advice. As you can see, under resources, we have invasive plant management fact sheets. Those are detailed enough that we tell you lots of details on how to apply the technique, when to apply it, the level of control you get, and some of the restrictions. That can be found on my website. I also work very closely with the Midwest Invasive Plant Network. They have a really good interactive invasive species management tool that you can search, you can access here. And if you're really interested in woody invasives, there is this woodyinvasives.org, which is a collaborative dealing with woody invasives in the upper Midwest, Midwestern region, and has some great information and descriptions about some of these techniques that I had. And I say don't hesitate to reach out to the experts that you find. There may be some local experts that can help you develop a key plan. Okay, that's my last slide. So
All
Matt,
right,
are we going
Mark.
to do some Q&A here now?
Yep. Well, let's go. Let's get through the logistical slides, and then you can
Okay.
kind of catch your breath, and I'll help with those. And if you watch this webinar live and are needing a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker. Her email is alenaw@iastate.edu. Email her by 5 o'clock today. Include your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, Elena Whitaker, alenaw@iastate.edu. Let's go to the next slide, which should be if you watch this webinar live and are willing to fill out a voluntary demographic survey, we'd greatly appreciate it. You can see where to go there on the screen or scan the QR code. If you've done that for a 2025 webinar, that's all you need to do. We just would like one response for all 2025 webinars. So if you've done it, thank you very much. And if you're willing to do so, we'd greatly appreciate it. We'll go to the next slide. All right, we're going to go to roots, residue, and returns. How manure and cover crops work together. Okay, we have Philip Roxon and Dan Anderson to talk about that next week. So please tune in next week for that webinar. And then one last slide should be that all the webinars are archived. You can go to iowalearningfarms.org website for those archives, or we have a YouTube channel just for that. Okay, Mark, we've gotten a lot of questions, but I'm going to take my prerogative as the moderator to ask the first one, which is,
Sure.
What's the time of year and what should I use to kill creeping Charlie in my yard?
Your lawn. Okay.
My lawn.
So creeping
Yeah.
Charlie is not a native plant, and it's really
Okay.
well adapted to the Midwest. That's why it's a problem. There's a range of options and tools, and we have some resources. I'll email you, Matt, later.
Okay.
We have some webinars. But essentially, if you're amenable to using herbicides, an application right now in the fall with some of our broadleaf herbicides is by far the best. Right around the first frost. It doesn't need to be before it, but right now when it's not stressed would be awesome.
Okay.
And usually you can get like a year of control. You can apply them in the spring, but you usually get like just a couple months of control and it comes back. So that's the recommendation I would use for that. There are other techniques. Keeping your lawn healthy, fertilize your lawn is another good thing to be doing.
Okay.
I have a feeling Matt asked that for himself.
I did. Oh, I asked that for myself. And I have to say, see, you gave me that answer. I live right next door to a weed scientist. He hasn't given me that answer yet. So I live right next to Bob Hartzler. So,
Gotcha.
okay. All right. There was a question about black locust. If
Yeah.
black locust is considered an invasive, and any suggestions how to control and eradicate.
Yeah, so we do have a fact sheet on our website on black locust. It is in Wisconsin considered an invasive. It's native to the southern part of the U.S. I believe it's still not native to Iowa. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. So it's a challenge because we planted it for decades, and it has creeping perennial roots. And so really, I would recommend two different approaches to managing this. We do not want to do a cut surface application because if we cut black locust, we get a sea of resprouts, literally thousands. So my first recommendation, if you just have a couple plants, would be to do a basal bark application. And the active ingredient aminopyrrolid or milestone is really the one of choice to use. If you have like a bunch of them and you don't want to spend the money and do all these basal barks, the other option that I recommend, and it's a little bit extreme, go ahead and mow or cut down those plants, let all those resprouts resprout, wait till the next year when they get around waist high, 3 to 4 feet, and then apply a foliar application of milestone. It's at a much lower rate and you get much better control because what you're doing is you're all those creeping roots, those buds are germinating, emerging, and developing, and it's easier to get the herbicide into the roots. But the key is don't spray it when it's 1 foot tall or less. Let it get up to 3 feet tall, and it can be really effective. Those are my two number one recommendations.
Okay, great. There's a next one. Have you looked at the use of glyphosate for aerial treatment late fall over forest stands for honeysuckle management like they have in parts of Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa?
So that's a great question. So no, we have not yet. We're starting a large demonstration where we're probably going to look at that in conjunction with our Illinois partners in Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. They have had tremendous success in Illinois, particularly Southern Illinois. I think the key aspect is you need to make sure that you get a window where you have leaf drop of the native desirable trees and that honeysuckle is still persisting. And they get that in Southern Illinois. I think in Southern Wisconsin, we'll get that, but that would be the key. Talking to my colleagues, that aerial application, they get around 80% control of like the bush honeysuckle. There they have amber, and then they just come back with spot treatments. And they said they've seen very little to no off-target injury from those late season applications. I don't know when it is, but obviously their timing in Southern Illinois is different. So I think it's a good tool, but it's tricky, right? So you need to make sure you have that timing because that window, I think, as we move farther north, is going to become much more narrow.
Okay, great. Are you seeing any residual impacts on non-target plants using triclopyr?
Yes. So yes, we are. We actually have done a study where we've done a cut surface application, applied the concentrated triclopyr 25% like recommended right on the stem, and then we collected soil samples distances away, and we could detect that triclopyr in the soil. I can talk about why it's getting there if interested, but the key point is yes, we do detect it. Often it's at low enough levels where the impact is minimal and it's not seen. But in some cases, you can get, people often call it like a ring of death. And you'll get like a 1 to 2 foot ring around that cut surface or basal bark area where you're killing grasses, even though it's tolerant to grasses, because we're applying it in such a high concentration. That usually is very temporary though and doesn't last like a year. It's like a month is what I see.
Okay.
So it does persist. You can see impacts. You don't always see it. And it's very short-lived is what I would say.
Okay. Next one, this person indicated last winter they had limited success with basal spraying honeysuckle. They used 5% crossbow with 95% diesel, low pressure backpack sprayer on the lower 18 inches of plants that were 6 feet or less, and they did that in February or March. They had better kill once they started to leaf out in April. And they also had tried 25% triclopyr 4 and 75% diesel with similar results. Any suggestions to improve the kill rate?
Yeah, so a lot of these honeysuckles can be more difficult. I would say the 5% crossbow rate is probably too low. So it's not a
Okay.
surprise that you got variable control. But if you got similar results with the 25% triclopyr, that's surprising. The first thing I would look at if it was a basal bark, correct, Matt?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. If it was a basal bark, the thing I would key in on is make sure that stem is dry, right? Because that stem needs to be dry in order for that herbicide, that oil to penetrate. If that stem's wet when you're applying, that could be a reason for poor control. And what we see with basal bark is the results are more variable than the cut surface treatment. So if you're not happy with the basal bark application and you're doing it under all these conditions, I'd switch to cut surface applications. It's just more work is the challenge.
Uh, Here's one just a little different direction, but I think that once it was asked, I'm really curious about this too. Is there anything to do once invasives appear to be eradicated? What should be considered to assist the soil rebalance?
Yeah. So I think we didn't talk about this, but revegetation is critical. And so if you can get something growing in place of that, that is the best thing. The worst thing to do is, say we spray a non-selective herbicide and kill everything, and then we don't replant anything. What's going to come back? It's going to be like creeping Charlie, garlic mustard, and other weeds. So if we can develop a program where we get other stuff planted, and that's where using selective herbicides can help. Most, not all, but most of our invasive plants are broadleaves. So if we can integrate reseeding with some native grasses or even non-native grasses too, as long as they're not reed canary grass or invasive ones, can be a really good start. And then that, because what happens is, let's take buckthorn. We can go in, control buckthorn. If we seed grasses, if we don't see any grasses, we get all those seeds that come back the next year and we have literally seas of seedlings. But if we can get grasses established, it does two things. One, we get less seeds that germinate, or they germinate and die from competition. And if we have grasses in there, those grasses senesce and we can do prescribed fire and burn and kill any of those. So we don't have to come back with herbicides later on. So for soil, clearly these all have huge benefits for soil health. Getting in a diverse mix is always ideal, but I would say let's wait to get that diverse mix in until we get those invasive plants and the seed bank under control, because then it really limits our ability to manage it.
Okay. Couple stump treatment questions here. One person indicated they try to do stump treatments midsummer to February. Do you agree that it starts to get risky after mid-February and sap may be rising even if it's not every day?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So the labels say this and the research has shown you can do a cut surface or cut stump treatment year round. Most of the products say avoid doing it when there's sap flow, but I think that's really just spring, March, April. And I've even heard reports, I've never done this, that when you can even get a decent control. So I would not I think that you can extend it much longer than he was, June to February.
Yep.
Probably through February, and you could probably do it, we've done it in late April, early May and had great results too.
Okay.
So very wide window.
Okay. Here's another one. If a stump is not treated right away, could it be recut and treated?
So this is where there's different, the cut surface applications, it depends on the herbicide you're using. If you're using glyphosate, you have to mix it with water because glyphosate doesn't mix with oils. So if you're doing a cut surface treatment with glyphosate, you need to treat it right away because that wound is sealing up. If you're mixing a product like a triclopyr-based product with a bark oil or kerosene or diesel fuel, you can actually wait days. I've heard people wait up to a week, and because that oil is present, that helps it get into the system despite that wound sealing up. I want to be clear though, I do not recommend that, because if anyone that's gone to a forest and cut a bunch of plants down and then come back later, you're never going to find all those cut
Yeah.
plants.
Mm.
And so if you can just have cut and treat while you're doing it, that is by far the most efficient way. And you're optimizing your results. But yes, you can go back a day or 2 days later,
Okay.
and you don't need to recut it. It would help to recut it, but you do not need to recut it to get effective control if you're using oil.
Okay. There were a couple in here about what have you seen to be the most effective for Canada thistle eradication? They're thinking in kind of CRP or pastures.
Yeah, and so there's several herbicides, but by far the most effective one are products that contain aminopyrrolid. So that would be Milestone alone, and then you can get ones where aminopyrrolid is mixed with other products. That would be Duracor or Pasture Guard. I think it's now Pasture Guard HL. So there's a bunch of products that contain aminopyrrolid. That's by far been one that's the most effective. There are some others that are equally effective, but there's more risk for off-target movements. So that's why I don't recommend them. You can go to our fact sheet and see those. But Milestone or aminopyrrolid, and the key is to apply it right before flowering in the flower bud stage, or mow it and apply it in the fall to the rosettes. That's a really good
Okay.
time. Like right now, you still have a window that you can do that, and it can be really effective.
Um, Somebody indicated here that Japanese knotweed is taking over riverbanks, low-lying fields, and other areas in northeast Iowa. Any thoughts on treatment for that?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of research on
Okay.
knotweed, and it's a mess,
Okay.
and it's really, really challenging. So I've got a good video that maybe I can send to Matt, and he
Oh,
can send out to the group that
yeah,
talks
because
about
we
the
could put
management
that
options.
on the blog when we write the recap
Right.
blog post on Monday.
Yeah, and it's a challenge. It's like a 5 year process to get rid of it. There are several products that work well, but selecting and herbicides are the only thing that we found for large scale infestations that work. Small scale ones, you can smother it by tarping it, but you need to leave the tarp on for like 4 to 5 years. So if you're willing to do that, that works great. Most people aren't willing to do that. So then we rely on herbicides, and the herbicides that you use is really they're only registered in certain areas. So if it's the areas you describe non-crop, probably the herbicide I would go for would be imazapyr, and there's an aquatic formulation called Habitat, and that is by far the best herbicide for knotweed. However, it's non-selective and it persists in the soil for up to a year. So if you spray this in summer or fall, you're going to kill all those plants, and it's going to be bare soil for 6 months to a year. And then the knotweed will start to come back and you'll have to
Yeah.
retreat. So that's the downside. So the other products that you could use up to the water's edge would be, again, this product called aminopyrrolid. It's only effective to apply in the fall before the first frost. So most of our knotweed got hit by a frost. We missed that window. The benefit of aminopyrrolid is it's safe to grasses. So if there's grasses underneath, they would be safe, and you could put down some grass seed too. So those are probably the two best options. Glyphosate's another option. It can work well, but we have to be extremely high in the rates where it gets very expensive. But you could reseed with grasses right after.
Um, all right, another one that might be a losing battle in some ways. Any recommendations on controlling reed canary grass?
Yeah, so reed canary grass is actually, you're going to laugh at it. It's easy to control.
Okay.
There's
Okay.
actually several tools that we can get rid
Okay.
of it. The challenge is the context of where it's growing. It's usually always growing like on the edge of a river, in a wetland, or in these areas. And that poses several problems. One of the problems is we did a bunch of work in riparian zones. We took it out. The next year, that area flooded. It brought in a bunch of new seed, and it was all reed canary grass, and it all came back. And so the challenge is, how do we control it and get competitive plants that are going to prevent it from reinvading? There's been a lot of work by others in wetlands that have had some success. You can apply some grass-specific herbicides in upland areas and get control, or do some targeted applications with aquatic formulations of glyphosate. A lot of the reasons in those wetland areas reed canary grass is so competitive is they're loaded with nutrients. So what they've done
Yeah.
is they've done a lot of mowing and removed the vegetation to get rid of some of the nutrients, and then they
Oh,
found dealing with the reed canary grass was easier. So it's a challenge. It's context dependent, and we have so much of it. We estimated Wisconsin has, I think it's 10% of its landscape is reed canary grass.
holy.
So
Okay. All right.
it's a real tough one to deal with because it's all throughout the watershed.
Yeah. Um, any recommendations for Phragmites control?
So that's another one that's challenging, but there are some tools that are out there. It's a perennial grass that grows on the water's edge and in wetlands like reed canary grass. Most people are relying on using this product, which is an aquatic formulation of imazapyr or habitat, either alone or mixed with glyphosate. You can get very effective control if applied in the fall. It's just how do you apply that stuff if it's in water or on the edge? In Wisconsin, at least, then we need a certification of an aquatic certification, and you need to get a permit to do it. And so that limits a lot of use. And then we're looking at drone applications. We're looking at these boats that can spray and all sorts of unique applications. I think drones are really effective too. So there's some good control technique. It's just trying to get the right technique for the context or the environment can be really unique. If it's a small area and it's dry, you can do what's called bundle and cut. So you take the clump and you bundle all the culms together. You cut it at like chest height to kind of keep it aligned, and then you kind of tie that bundle, and then you can spray like glyphosate in that bundle.
Okay.
And that can work with small clumps, but we have like football fields of it. So
Yeah.
obviously that's where the drone applications really come in.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe one last one in the interest of time, but do you have any recommendations for sumac and CRP?
Yeah, so we haven't done any work in sumac. That's a big problem. I think there's two approaches. Sumac has a creeping perennial root. So if we're going to cut it, like black locust, we're going to get a ton of stems. So I think what I would look at would be one or two options. If you just have one or two plants, I'd probably treat it foliarly, or I would do a basal bark. I would not cut it to try and limit the resprouting. But if you already have a ton of it, I might cut it and do a cut surface and plan on coming back because there will be missed resprouts and spraying the resprouts foliarly like late the next year. Whatever you do, plan on 1 year of control is not going to be enough with that if it's been there a long time. And I believe that I know people have used glyphosate with some success in the cut surface treatment, and I believe triclopyr works well. We haven't done any research on sumac though.
Okay. Mark, thank you so much for excellent presentation and also being willing to answer so many questions. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure others did as well. Again, if folks need a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today, and include your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. And I will give the last word to Mark if he has any parting shots.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the key is that developing a plan is your best approach. There's lots of resources out there and lots of experts. You know, I work in Wisconsin. I work with a lot of colleagues in Iowa and Illinois. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have more questions, because a lot of times these management, as you can tell, is very nuanced and it's tough to put into a one-page fact sheet. So ask for help. There's people to help you get the type of control you need.
Okay. Somebody did ask if you could show the slide contact again.
Yeah, that's right. I'll do that. Thank you. Okay, give me a second here. And so now you can see there's my email, and then there's our website right there.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark. Greatly appreciate your willingness to give this webinar today and stay on for 50 minutes to talk about this.
Sure, my pleasure. It was
Yeah.
great to chat with you all, and good luck in your future endeavors.
Yeah.